Hi, and welcome to GCs in the House, a podcast spotlighting general counsels. I'm your host, Lena Guo. In my conversations with GCs, we discuss how they got in the top legal seat, obstacles that they had to overcome along the way, and how they are tackling new challenges. Today, I'm chatting with Tom Lynch, General Counsel of Billion to One, a precision diagnostics company based in Menlo Park, California. Tom is a seasoned GC who brings over 20 years of experience in the life sciences industry. After graduating with his JD from Boston College Law School, Tom began his legal career at Dorsey and Whitney. After holding senior legal and compliance positions at Boston Scientific and Novartis Pharma, Tom served as general counsel of two publicly traded companies. Tom served as Chief Compliance Officer of Fortive's Advanced Healthcare Solutions business before joining Billion to One. Tom talks to me about how growing up in a healthcare environment led him to a career in the life sciences, his experience navigating through large and small organizations, and how being an adjunct professor has brought him an additional sense of fulfillment. Thanks for joining me. Now to the conversation. Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Lena. It's really my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's always so great to chat with you. Would love to have the audience learn about your career journey, given that you have had the general counsel title, the chief compliance officer title, the chief legal officer title. You are a truly seasoned CLO. So to start, can you tell us a little bit about your current company, Billion to One?
Sure, happy to, and I'll kind of cover a couple different areas. At Billion to One, we're a precision diagnostic company. We use sort of quantification of biology to create diagnostic tests, and we test patients at the molecular level. As a mission, we're committed to remove the fear of the unknown with our diagnostic testing, and we focus on fast and accurate and accessible testing. I could talk a little bit about the technology. I'm not a scientist, so bear with me, but what we're able to do with our technology is that detect mutations in DNA. And our technology is currently used in two spaces: prenatal testing and liquid biopsy for cancer patients. So how does it work? Our cells are shedding DNA fragments into our blood all the time. So from a blood draw, we can identify, isolate, and analyze these DNA fragments, and again, see if there's any mutations that could be the cause of some type of disorder. So like in the prenatal space, a woman is pregnant. Her blood, in addition to fragments of her own DNA, actually contains fragments of her child's DNA. So our technology is from the blood draw able to separate the mother's DNA from the child's, and then identify if there's any potential or screen for any disorders from the child's DNA, so we know before the child's born. I think one thing that this technology has been around for several years. What differentiates Billion to One's test is the ability, as I mentioned, to isolate the child's DNA. So something like a hereditary disorder, like cystic fibrosis, the standard right now is you would test the mother to see if she is a carrier and has that disorder marked in her gene. And if she is, then we test the father, because then, as you probably remember from biology class in high school or junior high, you sort of do that 4-section chart to determine if it's the likelihood the baby is going to have that disorder. But with our tests, we're able to pull the DNA fragments from the baby in the mother's blood. You don't need the father to be tested, so we're actually testing the baby directly for the disorders as opposed to testing both the parents. So that's the biggest differentiator that we have as a test. Why is that important? Because it's important for accessibility, and as I mentioned, accessibility is important to us at Billion to One. And this is an example of how the mother is able to get that information without having to bother the father. So we devote a lot of resources to accessibility. We want to make sure that the test is available to all patients. We talk to payers and health insurance companies. We talk to Medicaid and advocate in that area to make sure that our test is covered. Because again, it's important to us for healthcare to be equitable, and so we want to make sure that we can make the test affordable for all. I think the last piece, I would be remiss to talk about the company and just focus on the technology. I think our culture is a significant differentiator at Billion to One, and it's certainly why I joined, or one of the reasons I joined. And we're very planful and intentional about this. Ozan and David are our two founders. They still work with the company as the CEO and the CTO, and they were committed when they founded the company to make a company that is good in and of itself, regardless of the technology. So we hire talented, motivated people. We strive to create a high performance culture. Everybody is committed to learn from everybody else, regardless of your background. Everyone is empowered to lead and solve problems. And I think it really is a differentiating factor for us. Having gone through the hiring process myself, but then also, building a team at Billion to One, I can really see the value of how intentional we are in that area.
Thank you so much, Tom. And Billion to One really is a pretty incredible company from everything that I have already seen and read about, and it really sounds like it's a game changer in this space. And so, just to kind of go back to you and to rewind, where did you grow up, and what led you to a career in the law?
So I'm born and raised in Minnesota, and that's actually where I'm based right now. So I work remotely from Minnesota, and our headquarters in the Bay Area, and I go out there at least once a month to work with the team. I left Minnesota to go to college in the Bay Area, and then I went to law school in Boston. Returned back to Minnesota, where my wife and I started a family. We did actually live in Switzerland for 3.5 years, but again came back to our home here in Minnesota. So career in law. I was not someone who, in junior high knew I want to be a lawyer someday. I probably didn't have that much foresight in my career when I was that age. But I was really drawn to the legal profession because I wanted to go to law school. So I had graduated from college. I taught high school for 4 years, and I always knew graduate school was in the future, and law school seemed the most attractive. I'm really an inherently curious person. I love learning new things. It's really what's driven most of my career decisions. So I was going to law school more for the intellectual curiosity aspects of it, and less because I wanted to be a lawyer. And I really enjoyed it. Law school was a really memorable, positive time in my life. I mean, were you working hard? Were we having to cram and study? Sure, but I also learned a lot, and I learned a lot about myself. I mean, you can use the law to help solve problems, whether it's a disagreement or negotiating a transaction. And so that's the part that I really, really like about it, the problem solving and the analytical process. And that's what then pushed me into a career of law.
Fantastic. And how did you end up in the life sciences space?
That's probably goes back to my upbringing. So just a little bit of my background. I grew up in a family of healthcare professionals. So my dad was a cardiac surgeon. My mom was a nurse. That's actually how they met. They met at the hospital as colleagues. So they've always developed a curiosity about medicine growing up. They also really instilled a commitment to serving, which I think is reflected in most of us that are in the life science industry are there because we have a commitment to serving patients. But as a kid, medicine was it was talked about it at dinner and around the house. And I mean, in fact, I have 7 siblings, and all of them are in professions that touch medicine or public health or life science industry. So all of us have grown into a profession that involves the life sciences. I think also as a more specific professionally, when I was in private practice, at a law firm, Dorsey and Whitney here in Minneapolis, I sort of naturally gravitated to life science clients. There are a fair amount. So in Minnesota, we have branded ourselves the Medical Alley. You have the Mayo Clinic, you have, Medtronic, United Health Group, 3M, other companies, life science companies headquartered here. And they produce a lot of sort of spin-off entrepreneurs in the life science space. So there's a pretty vibrant kind of life science industry here in Minnesota. And in private practice, a lot of these startups were my clients. So, when I was a third or fourth year associate, I was fortunate to work with partners who are willing to say, hey, here's a smaller client, and you can be the point of contact with the client, and you can, be the relationship person for that client. And I just really liked, the innovative spirit that you saw in these entrepreneurs, the commitment to patient care. I mean, it's pretty exciting to be in an industry where you can be helping people and you're also doing kind of really cool, innovative technology. So I would say, it was the upbringing, but then also kind of the natural work that I was doing at a law firm that pushed me into the life science industry.
That makes sense. Wow, a family with 7 siblings and pretty much everyone in the healthcare space. That's pretty incredible. After practicing at Dorsey for many years, what led you to go in house?
Um, a couple different factors. I think, what probably drove me was the curiosity, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, at a very high level, and a lot of, I think, lawyers that move in house say this, I wanted to be closer to the business. I mean, as I mentioned, my practice had really gravitated towards life science companies. A lot of the work that I did as a corporate lawyer was M&A work, public and private company financing work. So, typically on a deal, we'd help a client. Maybe it was let's just say it was a private financing, VC backed financing. We'd help the client develop the business plan. We'd put together the offering documents, and we would help them with the materials to pitch to investors. Maybe they were looking for funding for, the next phase of their clinical study. And then we'd negotiate the investment. So that process probably took, 3 to 4 months, and we'd close the financing, and the client would go back with the investment, and they would kind of go and execute on the plan. And I would move on to another deal. And I was always kind of like, okay, so what happened? Like, you raised $50 million, and you said it was for a clinical study or to get regulatory approval for this product. Like, did you guys get it? How did the development work? I had all these additional questions that I was curious about, but I didn't. In private practice, you don't really have the luxury of, like, the clients aren't going to pay to teach me on that, and they're not going to allow me to bill for that. So you'd stay in touch with you in a little bit, but I was always really curious, like, okay, so how did that all work out? We did a lot of diligence on maybe an acquisition, and, like, and the stuff we found, like, how do you integrate the business into the larger company? So again, it was a curiosity of, like, just wanting to learn more about the business. I think, and then maybe more specifically, how did I get, so my first in-house position was with Boston Scientific at their division here in Minneapolis. And you kind of wonder, like, how did I get into that space? And,
Mhm.
I was, I kind of said by that point in my career, if I was going to leave the firm, I mean, I really enjoyed the practice. I enjoyed the people I worked with. It was going to be, to go to a life science company. At the time, this is around, 2002, 2003. Corporate associates were in high demand, and there was a lot of opportunities to move in-house. And there was, I remember one point somebody called about a boat company, and I was sort of intrigued to go interview there. And then I have to admit, I was like, and this is nothing against people that boat and fishing, and in Minnesota with 10,000 lakes, I do it myself. But I was like, that's just not going to get me jazzed in the morning to go work at a boat company. So I sort of said to the recruiter, like, if it's a life science company, I'd be interested. But otherwise, I'm perfectly happy here at Dorsey. And so I was fortunate to find the role at Boston Scientific. It's actually, so I almost turned down the offer. I mean, I was really discerning about, did I really want to leave the law firm? I had, been there for 5.5 years. I was, about a year away from being considered for partnership. Signs or indication were positive, and I can deliberate over decisions pretty well. So I wasn't sure, like, if I wanted to go. And I remember I had a conversation with my wife, and I said, I'm really not sure what I want to do. And she was like, well, if you stayed at the firm and made partner a year from now, and then were offered the same job at Boston Scientific, would you go? And I was like, oh, of course I would. It's a really great opportunity. She and she was like, okay, we're done. So it was really good advice. And it was sort of an obvious answer after that, and it was a great decision. I mean, it was while I really enjoyed my time at Dorsey, moving on to Boston Scientific was at that point in my career a perfect decision.
Your wife sounds very wise. And you ended up at Boston Scientific for almost a decade. How were you able to gain positions of increasing responsibility while you were there?
um Good question. I hadn't like and I hadn't thought about it, and again, I hadn't sort of thought when I walked in the door strategically, how is that going to happen? um I think I would first note, I mean, being at Boston Scientific for 10 years, it gave me a great foundation to sort of further develop my career. I mean, after my time at Boston Scientific, there were very few legal issues I hadn't at least touched. Maybe I hadn't led, but I wasn't like patent prosecution. Maybe the kind of the one area was like, okay, I really haven't done that. So it was a great foundational experience. But back to your question, I think increasing positions of responsibility. I When I think about it, there are maybe a couple different factors that helped me succeed there. I think first was I just volunteered for a wide variety of projects and roles. I mean, again, I'm a curious person. I'm really good at taking on more than I can do, and I was like, hey, I'll do that. Okay, I'll do that. And I remember my first manager, Jean, who was a tremendous supervisor and mentor. She was like, the biggest problem with you or challenge is you're kind of interested in everything. And at the time, I hadn't thought about it, but when I reflect on it, I was like, and that's probably why I like being a GC, because there is a wide variety. But like, for example, we had a key supplier who had filed for bankruptcy, and they're like, oh, we need somebody to help out figure out bankruptcy law. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And after that project, I became the quote bankruptcy expert in the legal department. I didn't know much more than my colleagues, but I sort of volunteered for that, and I got branded as having a little more experience than everybody else. So I think like that's sort of an element to success, is like I was willing to learn a variety of things so that when they came up in the future, I could be a resource to people. Um, I also tried a couple different roles at Boston Scientific. So in the 10 years I was there, I started out in the cardiovascular division. Then when we acquired Guidant, I moved over to that division in St. Paul. And then my last role was a corporate role supporting business development. So again, kind of in that theme of getting a wide variety of experiences. I think secondly, and it may seem obvious, I think people talk about this quite a bit when they think about in-house legal positions, but providing value to the business. So I, maybe not always consciously, but I was working towards or was providing value to the business. And I think, sometimes people think about, oh, I'm going to come in house and I'm going to provide value to the business by like, I'm going to bring strategic, impactful advice on this complex legal problem that the business is going to have. And, you know, and I found that the value I could provide, and maybe to this day still continue to provide, is in much more smaller incremental ways. Like getting a contract done for somebody who's in a pinch because they need this vendor to get signed up or consultant signed up the next day, that's adding value. Somebody comes and says, hey, I have a question about a marketing material and how the FDA is going to view it, and it may seem really small, or I have a question about whether I have to put this trademark on this marketing piece or not. Again, really small incremental ways, but you're adding value to that individual at that time, and that helps you in your reputation and the organization. And people are always very grateful when you help them solve a problem, regardless of the size, because that's the problem that they have that day. So I think trying to figure out ways where you can add value and pitch in, and they may not always be kind of the as impactful as you envisioned. I think a third area was I had really good mentors, outstanding colleagues. I mean, people invested, and again, not formally, but people invested in my development by, helping me, answering questions. Some of these were part of more formal professional development programs that you see at a lot of larger organizations, but many, many more were informal. So I'd recommend to people when you move in house first, find some people, especially in the business, that will give you some free advice. And again, it doesn't have to be, the VP of marketing or some higher up executive in the company. When I think about the people that helped me at Boston Scientific, one was an individual, Karen, who was, a director of sourcing when we first met. Now she, you know, advanced up into the company because she was a very capable individual, but I had a champion or a mentor informally with her just because we worked together, and I again added value to she was what she needed. Um, so those are kind of, I would say, trying to think back to your question, how did I gain positions of responsibility? Um, and I think I mean, one way for me, and people have different ways they approach it. I don't think I ever went into those things that I just described thinking, oh, this is going to get me a promotion, right? It
Hmm.
was more, this is going to help the business along. And if you help the business along with their objectives, then you're going to get a promotion, right? It's almost like focus on the substance of your work, and the other pieces will come in.
That's such fantastic advice, Tom. It sounds like your natural curiosity and your willingness to help, in addition to that great piece about finding good mentors, especially not just within legal, but others in the business who can be a champion for you. Those
Mhm.
really all went a long way. Was looking back, what were some of the challenges that you faced as a young in-house attorney?
Hmm. Challenges, I mean, first of all, I think my experience seems so positive, so I'm like, oh, I can't think of challenges. But I think,
Mhm.
I think one was, and this is again when you first move in house, is you like sort of finding your voice in the organization. If I think about it, and I didn't think about it when I was at the law firm, but I remember talking to somebody about it after at the law firm after I moved in house. When you're an attorney at a law firm, you know, right or wrong, you're a revenue generator, right?
Right.
So you get the resources you need, and people are coming to you because they specifically need something, whether you're working on a deal, whether you're drafting a contract for them, whether you're preparing their SEC filing, they're coming to you for something. And it's a bit humbling when you go in house because, a lot of my roles would be I would go to the cross functional meeting for the vascular access franchise, right? So you go to these cross functional business meetings, and there really weren't any specific legal issues that came up, right? Like I wasn't on the agenda to say, Tom is going to talk about legal issues now. So
Mhm.
there were times you sort of wonder, like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, what is my role here? And I think that was the biggest adjustment for me, is just sort of figuring out, am I just here taking up space? Um, and I think, and I don't know, it's not like a switch all of a sudden flipped and something changed, but I mean, my advice would be you just keep going to those meetings, and eventually your voice is going to be, there may be some legal issues that come up, definitely, and there may be specific legal projects that you have to do. But when you're supporting the business in-house, your voice is really contributing to the business discussion. There's objectives that the business is trying to achieve, and you provide a sort of a special expertise, right? There's somebody there from finance, and there's somebody there from regulatory, and there's someone there from marketing, and you're providing a unique expertise to that meeting, but it's all around the discussion of a business issue and less about a legal issue. So that was the part that took some. It's a good question because I hadn't thought about this in a while, but that's really, when I think about my first year or two, that was I times would go to meetings and I'd be like, okay, why am I here, right? And trying to figure out and find your purpose or your voice.
That's a great point, especially coming, as you mentioned, coming out of private practice as a revenue generator and going in house where uh, you're not, and you have to you are there to support the business and to help the business grow. And so you moved on to Novartis and also had many senior level roles there. And then at or what point did you know that you wanted to be a GC or felt that you were GC ready?
That's a good question. I think I would answer it most honestly and say, oh, maybe 6 months after joining Rexagen as the GC, I figured out I wanted to be a GC. It was, really, I was, so as you said, I had been at Boston Scientific and then the time at Novartis, most of which was in Switzerland. So I think just from a personal experience, it was fantastic. I think from a professional development standpoint, if someone is working in a large organization and has that opportunity, I think to work in a different culture or cross culturally is important for development. But anyway, back to your question. I was attracted to the GC role at this company called the Rexagen, was a biotech company in San Diego, really because of the size of the organization. I mean, when I first learned about the opportunity and learned that they were interested, I have to admit I was a little shocked. Like, you're interested in me, but I'm not GC material. But when I thought back to the time in private practice at Dorsey, like, these are the type of companies that were my clients. And I didn't mention it earlier, there was a point at Dorsey where there was a client that was thinking of going public, and we started preparations for an IPO. And if they had gone public, I think I probably would have become their general counsel, which is something that the CEO and I had talked about. And then they ended up not doing that and getting sold. So they went down a different path. But I remember thinking when I was learning about the role at Erection, I was like, oh, this is like the clients I worked with at Dorsey. I would love to work in that sort of size environment and that type of entrepreneurial environment. And again, it's proved to be very, very positive.
Was there anything about once you became is sat in the general counsel seat, was there anything about the role that surprised you?
Um, Biggest surprise of being a GC was really how much of the role is not legal work. And I don't mean to say like I don't do legal work as a GC, but as a GC, you're a leader in the organization, however large or small it is. You may have a team, you may not have a team that reports to you, but you're a business leader first. And like I said a couple minutes ago, you're a business leader with an expertise in one function. And well, I had learned this as a kind of being in house. You sort of learn this, but I had to continue to remind myself that I wasn't there just to give legal advice. I was also there to help achieve the business objectives. So I think at Erection, I was really pretty fortunate to have two leaders that I worked with that were really strong mentors. I mean, the CEO, Mike, he just believed in me, and he believed that I could do the job, which was a great motivator for me. And he really taught me how to think innovatively. I mean, I hadn't before been I don't really much of an innovative thinker. And then the other person, excuse me, Tom, was our chief operating officer. And I would say he really taught me how to lead a team and achieve objectives. Like he was great as I was building out the legal team there, sort of working with me to figure out how do we get the team to all kind of row in the same direction. I think the other thing that was a surprise as a GC was um, kind of your work is identifying resources and the best way to allocate those resources. So a key decision you have as a general counsel is what things are you going to do in-house and what things are you going to do externally. And obviously, depending about the size of your team, that could impact that. But you get to ask yourself questions about, should we use external counsel? Should we hire an internal resource? Is this something we have an internal resource that could learn this? And that sort of team management or functional management was something that I should have known as coming in as a GC. But to answer your question, it wasn't something about I thought that it was going to have to do. And I think a kind of a carry on to that is I would say team leadership, professional development. You're not just giving legal advice, you're also managing a team and making sure that the business is getting the support that they need. And I would think that's been one of the more rewarding aspects of my career is, helping to develop people to achieve the professional goals that they want. I mean, one kind of quick story is when I joined Orexogen, one of our key initiatives was to building a legal team. So we had some people to part and we had some other needs. And so I really was, almost building a legal team from scratch. And I had some great resources that helped with that. But trying to find people that have the same DNA and the same attitude, and again, are kind of your commitment to work collaboratively is was I just didn't anticipate coming into the role that I was going to have to do that. And we had a great team. I mean, I loved when people in the business would say, I've never worked with a legal and compliance team that's so collaborative, so helpful. I mean, that was good to hear. But in professional development, even more specifically, so we had two individuals attorneys that joined the team around that time, Chris and John, and they, both during the interview process said, look, I have a career goal to be a general counsel. And it's a little at times intimidating. You're like, wait, you want my job? Right. But you can take that attitude, and I think you'll end up, it won't be successful. But you take the attitude of like, okay, well, let's figure that out. We have some work to do and we have to support the business, but let's always be conscious of how we can give opportunities to you to be able to develop and grow. So like by way of example, the patent attorney we had in-house left. And so one of these individuals, we had to do some, patent prosecution work. I was like, why don't you take over supervising that? He wasn't a patent attorney, but he was able to learn how to help manage the patent portfolio with our outside counsel. And I like telling that story because sort of the good end of that story is both of these two individuals now are themselves GCs at life science companies today. So kind of the goal that they set 7 or 8 years ago has been achieved, which is just really, really thrilling for me.
That's incredible, and it goes to show what a great leader you are. To be able to groom other GCs is definitely a very telling factor of the type of leader and manager that you are.
Yeah.
And
yeah, well, I think, like, sorry, just as a final footnote, I mean, what I'm looking forward to is doing the same at Billion to One. So we, our fourth team member on the legal and compliance team is starting at Billion to One on Monday. And so we'll now have 2 attorneys, Taylor and Jesse, and we have an operations manager who helps support our compliance program, Lena. And I mean, my goal is to replicate the same and hopefully that they have the same professional experience that we did at Orexogen.
congratulations on the new additions to your team. I'm sure they're great hires because Billion to One has a highly selective hiring process. And not everyone has had the opportunity to be a chief compliance officer. Can you just talk a little bit about your experience there as well?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think, people in the legal profession are kind of aware that, there's oftentimes a choice where you're making a different path. Am I going to be in the legal profession, or am I going to be in compliance? And so I worked for 2 years, and my role was focused at a larger company of, heading up the compliance program for their healthcare division. And it's it was a great experience because it was really taking, like, prior to that, as a general, so let me take a look at Boston Scientific, we didn't really have a separate compliance program. So people in the legal function, it was, before we were sort of making that professional distinction. And then at Orexogen, John kind of, oversaw the compliance program. So I was learning from him, but I wasn't really implementing. So it was really enjoyable to have an experience to implement a compliance program, especially at a larger global company. And it's good work. It's a lot of hard work, and I think, we're at the process at Billion to One of building that out. Right now, one of our goals is to, our legal department goals is to have, our compliance infrastructure complete by the end of the year. And so we've developed a code of conduct and policies, and we're working through that. But having that experience previously to kind of focus on a compliance program was really, really helpful for me to get kind of more in the weeds in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been an executive at organizations of all sizes. Billion to One is the smallest thus far. In what ways has being a GC at Billion to One been different from your previous roles?
I think couple factors. I would say one factor is, without an internal legal team, I think Billion to One was doing a really good job on the legal front. So we have members of the senior management team, and our Kuno CEO are really knowledgeable about the law. They had good external counsel before. So it's actually the first time where I've come in and the role is new. So in previous companies I joined, including Orexogen, there was somebody in the GC role before me. So it's different. Secondly, because you're sort of establishing what is the role of the general counsel, and now that we have our team is growing, kind of what is the role of the legal department. So it's been great because people in the organization, like, they come with some legal background already, because somebody that was director in quality, she was handling the privacy program before, right? So she would come and she has a lot of knowledge already, as it's being sort of responsibility is being transitioned to me.
And what are some, if any, of the challenges that you have faced at Billion to One that are new to you?
Well, now that you say new to me, I was going to say there's a lot of work, but there's that's always been the case. Probably two areas. One is the technology, and then the other is the industry that we're in. So, the technology piece, I'm not a science. I was a history major undergrad, and I can claim that I'm very curious, but there's just certain fundamentals of genetics I don't know. And so I've had ample homework on the weekends since I joined to try to get up to speed. And now I think I can at least have a conversation with some of the members of our R&D team, even if I don't understand a portion of it. So the technology is one. And then more specific to the legal and compliance role is the lab service industry. So I've worked in life sciences, both pharma and device, worked in larger and smaller companies, but I have not worked at a lab company before. And what makes that different, not just kind of what we're doing, but we also are a provider of healthcare services, which means we bill insurance companies and we bill Medicaid and Medicare. So this is an area that I'm not as familiar with. And there's additional regulations that I have to learn. So it was different and a challenge because it was a bit humbling, right? I couldn't say with confidence, oh yes, I've worked in this area before and this is what I've seen before. So again, spent a lot of time kind of teaching myself, a lot of time with some really tremendous external lawyers to sort of help educate me, and candidly, business team members of Billion to One, who, as I mentioned earlier, are pretty knowledgeable about the rules as well.
It's incredible how there's always more to learn, especially in the life sciences space. And it's a good thing that you have your natural curiosity to propel you forward. Uh, Given the uncertain macroeconomics, what factors helped you determine that billion to one was the right move for you? I think earlier on you did mention that the culture was really important to you, and obviously just kind of being part of a mission-driven company. But as you were assessing the company generally, were there any other factors that helped you decide that BTO was the right place for you?
Yeah, definitely. There's probably, I would say, some initial hooks. One was the technology. So despite what I said that I didn't really fully understand it, it's it's really quite innovative. And the intellectual curiosity in me just it's just very attractive. So I know when I first learned about the company, I was like, oh, this is really like we're doing some really interesting, cool stuff. The other piece is working at a company that is not public, but venture capital backed, with a plan to go public. So my other GC roles, again, at the two smaller companies, we were publicly traded companies, and I was, working as the secretary of the organization on the public company work. We're not there yet. And while I did this in private practice, I really want to be part of an organization that goes through the IPO process. So looking forward to contributing with that. I think that those are sort of the hooks. I would say that kind of once I was in the process, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, the people and the culture. I mean, I can recall in the interview process, which is very planful and intentional and thorough. Um, and I mentioned that because it's actually, I believe, what helps us to drive such a strong culture. But back to the interview process, I mean, I would meet with somebody, and the interviews were kind of, sort of because of Zoom scattered around maybe a 2 week period, and I would be like, oh my God, I would love to work with that person. That person was so good to talk with. They had so much information. They were so interesting. So I kind of walked away from each interview that much more enthusiastic about it as I met another person in the organization. So, ultimately, what kind of pushed my interest at the end was the people and the individuals that I met.
Great, and it usually is given, especially at this level, how much time you need to be spending with those people. You have been an adjunct professor for years. Tell us about how you got your start.
Oh, yes. So I've had the opportunity to be an adjunct professor at two of the local law schools. One instance teaching M&A. Over the last 7 years, I have been teaching at University of St. Thomas Law School um, as an adjunct professor, teaching negotiations and then preparing students for an ABA competition in negotiations. How did I get the start? I learned about it through word of mouth, actually, through someone in the Minnesota Bar Association. There was somebody that was in the role and they were moving out of town, and they, were looking for someone to replace them. I mean, it's one of the most rewarding parts of my day. I mean, it's a perfect mix for me of teaching, but also competing. A lot of students are incredibly diligent. They're, often the students are often they are very intelligent, and they are just eager to learn, right? So it's a pleasure working with people or students that are that motivated. I'm also a competitive person, and so the program is a negotiations class or course, but then we also participate in the ABA's negotiation competition. It's a little bit like moot court or mock trial. This is just another competition that they have. So that kind of intensity, but also camaraderie you develop with the competition is really fun. And the program has really kind of taken off in the last 7 years. I mean, we have been qualified so you go to a regional tournament, and then if you are one of the two teams from there that qualifies to nationals, you get to go to the national competition. Or the team has gone to the national competition now for the last 5 years. So
Wow.
it's great to see the success in the program, which again is 100% to the students. I'm sort of just there as an advisor and trying to guide them. And we started last week. The new semester has started, so we're already preparing for our competition, which will be in November.
Wow, that sounds extremely rewarding and very, very exciting. So between your GC role at Billion to One and your role as an adjunct professor, what do you do to decompress? Do you have any free time?
I think it's hard to find the time, but it's important to find the time. I think there's a couple different areas. I mean, for me personally, I enjoy jogging as a form of exercise. I used to call it running, but now at my age, I think it's jogging. And I like being outside. In Minnesota, we get various types of temperatures throughout the 4 seasons. But just being outdoors, whether it's hiking or even just walking the dogs or biking, just being outside is a good deeper decompressor for me. I in addition to law school, still try to stay active and contribute. I'm actually on the board of a nonprofit school, and then I've just joined the board of a small device company here in town to start giving back in those areas. But probably after that, I mean, it's to fully decompress. It's spending time with my family. My wife and I, we have 4 kids, ages 16 to 24. And the older ones go to school in various parts of the country right now. But they're great individuals, and really spending time with them, hanging out, talking, doing whatever is a real joy. And I guess I would say after that, I am often trying to learn something new, whether that's listening to a podcast or enjoying a book or something like that. So I don't know if it's decompressing, but it is. I guess distractions are a way for me to get re-energized for my day-to-day job.
Well, it sounds like in some ways it sounds like you enjoy what you do so much, right? As an attorney, as a professor, that it probably doesn't feel like work, or it may not feel like you're working as much as you are. So these additional ways of giving back to the community and spending time with family are just cherry on top. Well, thank you so much for the chat, Tom. It's been really great learning even more about you. We've spoken, we've known each other a while, but I feel like every time we talk, I always learn just more about you and your journey. So I really appreciate the time.
Well, you're more than welcome. I really appreciated the discussion as well, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about this. It's been great because it helps me think about and reflect on some of the parts of my career that I hadn't thought about recently. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to GC's in the House. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will join me next time for an in-depth discussion with another general counsel. I welcome your feedback and recommendations for guests. You can reach me at lguo@mlaglobal.com. Please also reach out if you have any questions or comments about today's episode. Until next time.